We say things like, maybe later, perhaps another time, or I'll see you tomorrow. But for some of us, there won't be a tomorrow. Listen as your worst nightmares come to life. These nightmares have become someone's reality. My name is Justin Crowley, and this is The Murder Project. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of The Murder Project. In this episode, we're going to be speaking about a case that is full of a lot of strange events. There's a lot of things in this case that seem like it's going to make it pretty open and shut, but then all of a sudden it takes another turn, and we're left with more questions, and we're kind of wondering, what happened? What the heck happened in this whole case? It's going to be coming out of a small town by the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and the reason I reference the DFW area is because it's the largest city closest to the town. The town itself is called Midlothian, Texas, and it is not a town that is known for a lot of violent crimes, much less a murder. So let's get started talking about it right now, because it's going to be a very, very interesting case, as I mentioned earlier. Strap in, everyone, because episode 11 starts right now. It's April 18th, 2016, Midlothian, Texas. Terry Bevers, who also goes by the name Missy, has just arrived at the Creekside Church of Christ. Now, it's 4:20 in the morning when Missy arrives, and the reason that she's getting here this early is because she puts on a Camp Gladiators workout class that starts at 5 a.m. Now, usually she uses the church parking lot, but because of the situation at hand, that be the rain, she had to move the class into a larger classroom inside of the church so that she could get her Camp Gladiator attendees out of the rain. Now, when I looked into this Camp Gladiator workout program, what I found was that it is similar to a kind of third-party workout program where you use the name of a certain company and probably their web base and platform and things like that, but you are responsible for putting on the classes and bringing your own weights and other exercise equipments and things of that nature. You teach the class, you recruit for the class, you kind of do everything else, and then you use this program as kind of a platform so that you have, technical support and websites and everything to kind of hold on to. Now, Missy, before she decided to get into fitness, and more particularly fitness instructor, I read that she had always been into fitness, workout, and in her early life, I read that she had worked in like retail type businesses, and then also she worked for a school district helping special needs children. And I think all of these things that we're going to speak about in the beginning kind of point to the character and who Missy was as a person. She liked to help people. She liked to help people with special needs. And she also liked to keep people in shape, get people in shape, and help them with their fitness. I think anybody that gets in a role of a personal trainer not only truly loves fitness themselves, but truly cares about other people. So it's 4:20 in the morning. Missy arrives to the Creekside Church of Christ. She is getting all of her equipment set up. Her vehicle is out in the parking lot. The door to her vehicle is left open, which kind of, to me, seems like she was in the process of loading and unloading things out of her vehicle, and she planned on returning. When she makes it into the church, either on her first or second trip, she is met by somebody inside the church that has a very terrible plan that he or she is about to put in motion. Fast forward to 5 a.m., and all of the Camp Gladiator students, I guess you could say, are arriving at the church. They're sitting out in their cars. Like I said, it was raining, and they kind of get together and walk into the church. One woman in particular goes into the classroom where they are supposed to meet, and they find Missy's body on the floor. Missy has been struck in the head several times, and she also has puncture wounds on her chest. At 5:06 a.m., a 911 call comes out from the church, and when first responders arrive, they try to assess Missy and provide her care, but she is pronounced dead shortly after the EMS arrives. So let's rewind a little bit and see what happened just prior to Missy showing up. Fortunately for this case, there were some surveillance cameras inside the church that were working, and from what I understand, there might be some other surveillance cameras in the church that weren't working. I do know that the church did not have an alarm system, or it was not set that night, because at 3:50 a.m., someone walks into the church. They use a pry bar or something similar because they found tool marks on the back door of the church. This person gains entry into the church, and you can see them on the closed-circuit TV kind of walking around aimlessly through the church. I've heard in some reporting and in some other people that have spoke about this case say that it looked like the person was clearing the church, but to me it looked like it was kind of random, like they were just walking around looking for something. And I don't know what that something was. I do know that what that person found was Missy, and she ended up dead, and that is very unfortunate. So this person in particular, this walking around, is wearing a outfit that sort of resembles a police SWAT type outfit. And the reason I use that term is because it kind of gives you an image right away of what this person might be dressed like. However, for me, I know that when I look at the situation and the person in the closed circuit TV footage, I can tell you that it is definitely not SWAT gear. From the looks of it, and which I've kind of seen it on a grainy closed circuit TV, but it looks like a man that is heavy set. From what the investigators claim, this person is anywhere from 5'2" to 5'8", and I'm sure they had some sort of scientific way of figuring that out. But for my own investigation, quote unquote, if you can say that, I'm not going to hold that to be exact, because as we're going to see, there's going to be several suspects that come into play, and a lot of them don't meet this height criteria. And originally in the first of the podcast, I said man or woman because we're not even actually sure if it was a man or woman because of the outfit they're wearing, and I will get back to that. You can't see the face or any features about the person that might give you a solid clue as to this is either a man or a woman, etc. So the person is wearing a riot helmet, what looks like a riot helmet. It's all black. It's got a face shield. They are wearing a vest that says police on it. A lot of people refer to this as the SWAT vest. However, through my experience in training, to me, it looks like a impact vest that is similar to riot gear. So impact vest might protect you from some sort of stabbing or penetration, but it will not protect you from any rounds that were fired from a gun. So it's not a bullet resistant or bulletproof vest, but it looks to me like a impact vest. The person's also wearing some type of 5'11" tactical pants, and all this means is that it's kind of like regular 5'11" type police pants. It's just got the extra pockets on the side, and it looks like they're wearing some sort of lace-up boot that is similar to what law enforcement wear. Now, the reason that all of these things look so familiar to me is whenever I was working in the jail, I was on our special response team inside the jail, and we wore a lot of items similar to this if we had to suit up and go in and get someone and extract them from their cell. When this person makes entry into the building, they have what looks like a hammer and possibly a screwdriver or maybe an ice pick or something like that. In my opinion, because of the tool marks on the back door and the item resembling a hammer, I would probably associate the other item as a screwdriver just because it kind of fits the rest of the items that the person had. You know, a pry bar, a hammer, a screwdriver. Those things go together a lot better than, say, pry bar, hammer, ice pick, you know, something like that. So you can see the person walking around in the video, and they're going through and opening up doors and looking into rooms, walking down hallways casually. There's one thing specific about this person that kind of catches everybody's eye in the beginning, and that is the fact that this person has a limp or a gait whenever they walk. Their right foot, right leg kind of strikes the ground differently in a way kind of similar to the gait that I have. It's not exact because depending on where your injury is, whether it's the ankle area, knee, hip, or even lower back, it will make the gait look slightly different. This person, as they're walking through the church, they are kind of smashing out windows and committing other types of vandalism while they're in the church. And this is important because it kind of helps the detectives later on figure out where this person has been, and it ultimately gets them to the point of entry, where the person came into the church. Now, as this person is walking around, we have to understand that we get about maybe 8 total minutes of video, possibly slightly less. But this person was in the church for over half an hour before Missy arrived. And what I think is interesting is that in the video, as this person is walking around, at some points it seems like the person is familiar with the area that they're in, and then at other times it seems like they're possibly lost. I don't know if you guys are familiar with some of those doors that they have where half of the door, like the top part of the door, opens and you can leave the bottom part of the door shut. But they have several of these doors in the church, and at one point the suspect opens up one of the doors and prepares to walk through, but the top portion of the door stays closed, and it seems like it kind of throws them off guard. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that this person is familiar or not familiar with the area, and just the fact of the matter is they might have thought that the door was going to open. And this is what I mean when I say that there's a lot of things that are interesting about this case, because I can't seem to tip it in one direction or the other. But we do know that, as I mentioned earlier, Missy enters the church at 4:20, and a car is later seen on closed-circuit TV leaving around 4:30 in the morning. Now, this would give the person about 10 minutes to commit this crime, which would be enough, in my opinion, based off of the injuries that Missy sustained. So at some point in the process of this person walking around the church, they stumble across Missy. She's stabbed in the chest multiple times with an object that I think was probably the screwdriver. And then she was smashed in the head with a blunt object several times, ultimately causing her death. And this is where I kind of get the screwdriver and the hammer. Now, when the Camp Gladiator students arrived and called 911, police showed up and immediately started canvassing the area and looking around. And originally it was thought that this might have been a burglary in progress, and Missy just happened to be collateral damage for that burglary. Now, later they would find out that this probably wasn't the case, because the church didn't really have anything of value beyond, maybe the furniture and some of the equipment that's in the church. And I know a lot of churches have some very expensive PA equipment and audio visual and things of that nature, but nothing was found to be taken from the church. So after a representative was contacted and came up to the scene, they were able to let the police know that it did not appear that anything had been taken. This is also interesting because Missy still had on all of her jewelry, including her wedding ring. And I understand that getting ready for a workout, she might not have had a whole lot of jewelry on, but they did notice that her wedding ring and some other items were still there. So as the investigation is unfolding, the police are realizing very quickly that this is probably not going to be a burglary in progress that went wrong. Now, police continue to look at evidence and they send a lot of things off, I'm sure, to get tested, DNA evidence and things like that. But one of the first things they want to do is get a hold of Missy's husband, because Missy is married. She's married to a man named Brandon Bevers, and they want to let him know that an incident has happened to his wife. Now, later on, Brandon would make an interview that stated he believed in the beginning that his wife had been in a car accident of some sort, because the person that called him stated that Missy had been in an accident and that he needed to get home. And the reason I say that he needed to get home was because one of the things that a lot of people like to highlight is the fact that Brandon was out of town in Mississippi on a fishing trip whenever Missy was murdered. If you're unsure with the way that law enforcement works, a lot of times in cases like this, or a lot of times in cases of murder, you are more than likely, statistically anyway, more likely to be killed by someone you know than someone you don't know. So the police like to start with close family members, other relatives, friends, and then they kind of move outward from there. So Brandon starts his journey back to Midlothian from Mississippi. And when he arrives, the police fill him in on what happened. From everything that I've seen on his interviews, he looks to be devastated. Now, I will say one thing about him is that he does not appear to be a very emotional fellow. Now, a lot of people like to point out that this makes him look guilty. But in my experience, and I think a lot of people will know, that people grieve in different ways. Some people do not show emotion, and then you have the other end of the spectrum, the other extreme, which is they are hysterical. And you can have one side or the other and anything in between. Brandon does look like he is in a bit of distress when he is talking to reporters and when he's speaking to and with police, but he does not show a whole lot of emotion. I guess enough emotion that people would think that he was not involved some way from the get-go. So police talk to Brandon and they ask him about his marriage, and on the surface he tells them that things are good between him and Missy. They have their up and downs just like any other married couple, but overall they seem to be doing okay. When they look into the marriage between Missy and Brandon, I think that a lot of people can understand and sympathize with the point that we don't like for any of our skeletons, as they say, to come out of the closet. And one of the things that will happen during a police investigation is they're going to dig into everything. They're going to look into your life, your past relationships. They're going to talk to friends. They're going to look at phone conversations, emails, your social media accounts, everything. If you have anything hiding in there, it's going to come out to light. And if there's anything in there that kind of looks suspicious, of course, they're going to ask you about it. So the police do and are tasked to do a unfortunate and uncomfortable job of really getting into your business. That makes a lot of people uncomfortable, as it should. And I also believe, especially for me, it made me uncomfortable in certain situations. But it is a must whenever you're trying to figure out what happened, especially in the case of a murder. So one of the things that the police find out about is that Missy has had some extramarital affairs. I know that people do not like to speak ill of the dead, and I'm one of those people. But I think it's important to understand when we're breaking down this case that we have to look at everything from every angle. Who could have done this? Who might have had a motive to kill her? And unfortunately, you have to overturn every stone and try to get a line on a suspect, and this is one of the things that happens when you do that. Brandon knew about several of Missy's affairs, and from what he says, they had talked it over, worked these things out, and their marriage was a work in progress. It was kind of it had been patched up and things were okay, but he still knew that these things had happened. Now, when police find out about this, I think that kind of puts the spotlight on him a little more, because they think this might be a motive as to why Missy was killed. But you have to have evidence to back that up, and so they're going to start looking for that evidence. Missy also had several social media accounts. They also found in her LinkedIn account that she had been talking to men or several men, and she was being kind of flirtatious with these men. So in the police's opinion, I would think, I don't know this for sure, but I think that they realized that Missy might have still been caught up with the fact that she had an eye for people other than her husband. And interestingly, in one of the messages, they found that she had been kind of receiving threatening messages from a guy. And also her friends had told the police that there was someone recently that was sending her threatening messages that tried to connect with her on, I believe it was the LinkedIn account. And she either wasn't responding or had rejected this person's attempts at contact, and it made them angry. Now, I know that police probably would have looked into this lead, but there is not any information based off of, from what I've seen, that any of the LinkedIn accounts actually turned up anything solid. And this will become more obvious here in a little bit. So the police are going through all of her social media and everything. They're talking to everybody. Like I said previously, from what I've seen, none of these accounts that she had where she had been talking to other people turned anything over. And what I would suspect is that the police contacted the persons that she was talking to and spoke with them, spoke to their spouses if they had any, because one of the working theories with this is that you could have had a lover scorn situation. Either a person that Missy was having an affair with got angry if, say, she broke it off, or the reason I also mentioned earlier, the man-woman situation where we don't know who the person in the riot gear was. Was it possible that a spouse found out that they were being cheated on and went and contacted Missy, and the end result was her murder? So after police start looking through all this information, they stay kind of on top of Brandon and going through all of his timelines and stories. But for Brandon, the one thing that works out well for him is that he was in Mississippi. So you can't technically say that Brandon himself did it because he has too many witnesses that saw him in Mississippi. He was several states away. So that kind of gives him that rock solid alibi. Several days after the murders, I believe it was 4 or 5 days later, Brandon's father, who was identified as Randy Bevers, showed up to a dry cleaner's in Midlothian. They lived in Redwood, Texas, which is just a small town not far from Midlothian, 20 minutes, I believe is what I read. Now, he had gone into a dry cleaner's and was trying to get a woman's shirt dry cleaned. And when they looked at the woman's shirt, they realized that it had blood on it. And they obviously knew, the employees of the cleaners, everything that was going on, because this is a small town. They knew Randy, and they knew that his son Brandon was married to a girl named Missy who was just murdered. So good on them. They contacted the police and let them know that Randy had brought in a shirt that had blood on it. The police got a search warrant and went up and retrieved that article of clothing. They brought it back to the police station and they sent it off for testing. In the meantime, they called Randy and asked him to come up to the police station to make a statement. And when he got called up to the police station, news cameras were outside and they were kind of waiting for him to go in and then waiting for him to come out, if he did, to try to catch any parts of the story that they might have missed. So Randy and Brandon go in to the police station together. And as they're walking in, the camera catches Randy kind of shuffling into the lobby. One of the things that was interesting about Randy is that he had sort of a limp. And people immediately started saying that Randy was their guy. You had the blood on the shirt, and you had a man with a limp. Now, the problem is that we're going to find out when Randy exits the police station and he is talking to reporters. He doesn't try to run away. He faces them head on. And he said, good on the dry cleaners for calling the police. That kind of lets him know that everybody in the community is involved and is trying to get this case solved, and they wanted justice for Missy and closure for Brandon and their 3 daughters, because Missy and Brandon also had 3 daughters. Brandon is without his wife, the kids are without their mother, and Randy was talking about how he was glad that people were looking out for everyone in the community. The thing about Randy is that he had a pretty solid story about the shirt. And if you remember me saying it was a woman's shirt, a woman's extra large shirt. Blouse is what they referred to it as. And he said, well, he had a small dog, a Chihuahua, that had been in a fight with another dog. And after they separated the 2 dogs, they had to take the Chihuahua to the vet. And blood from the dog got on the shirt. And they had tried to wash it at the house, but were unable to get the blood out. So he took it to the dry cleaners to try to get the blood removed. He said that he also had a shirt that was covered in blood from the dog, and that he had brought it to the dry cleaners as well, but the dry cleaners had only offered the one shirt to the police department. Now, I wasn't able to confirm if Randy actually brought another shirt in, because as we get along in this, we're gonna talk about a few things that I think kind of set this case back, and that is, one being the police don't offer a whole lot of information. So we have the woman's shirt, we have Randy's story, and from face value, it seems like it is a valid story, or that it could be a valid story. All they'd have to do is check it out. Well, later on, Randy's daughter, Brandon's sister, says that incident with the dogs actually happened, and she was present when it's happened. Later on, we'll find out that when the shirt is tested, the blood on the shirt does come back as canine blood. So the blood on the shirt is the dog's. Now, a lot of people in the community said that this was just coincidence, and they had seen Randy and the limp, and they knew that Randy was the guy. Now, I think this is one of the things that we should discuss as far as people getting caught up on certain individuals without a whole lot of information. It's going to take a lot more than a bloody shirt and a guy that kind of shuffles differently to go ahead and peg him for a murder. But people get locked in on things, and they can't let certain things go. even when it was determined that the blood on the shirt was from a dog, a lot of people still pointed the finger at Randy. And then a lot of people found out that Randy was actually in California whenever Missy was murdered. So it couldn't have been him. But could it have been his wife? That's the next thing that everybody starts pointing to. They start pointing to the fact that Brandon was out of town and Randy was out of town. And then you have the woman's blouse with the blood on it. Well, maybe it was Randy's wife, but there's no actual evidence to say this. And not only that, but Randy is slightly larger than what the police identified the person in the video as being. Like I said, the police thought that the person was between 5'2" and 5'8". And if you look at Randy in some of the photos and the videos, you're going to see that that is definitely not him. A lot of different people, especially if they're taller, older, say they're a little overweight, whatever the situation can be, this is Randy that I'm making reference to. He might walk a little differently than your average folk, and he might have a little shuffle in his step, but that does not mean that he's a murderer. So the police end up having to move past Randy and his wife and Brandon, because at this point you want to look at the family. Obviously it's not going to be the daughters. Brandon's in Mississippi, Randy's in California. They don't have anything to show that it could have been a wife, Randy's wife, or another family member. So they have to scrap all that and go back to the starting board. And when they go back to the starting board, they're looking at other information. They're still waiting for leads. There's a company in one of the two towns that puts out a $10,000 reward looking for information in the murder of Missy, but so far nothing has turned up. There's also rumor around town that Missy and Brandon's relationship was in further strain due to money issues. So we have the infidelity, we have potential money issues, and other than that, we don't have any evidence that anyone in the family had committed the crimes. And then this is one of the things I'd also like to highlight, that a lot of people have marital issues. Most people in America at this time, and possibly around the world, and even in 2016, a lot of marriages struggle financially. That is not something that is just specific to Brandon and Missy. So I think that we also can't get hung up on that specific detail. A lot of these things can cause people to do irrational things, including and up to murder. But at this point in time, we don't have any solid evidence that points directly to Brandon or Randy. So, like the police, I think that we should move on from those two people. We can circle back, most definitely, but at this point, I think we should move on. Now, the police interview other people. They come up with another person of interest. At the time, there was on a surveillance video, there was another vehicle of interest, a vehicle of interest that might have been in the area, because the cameras in the church parking lot weren't working. And so they weren't able to catch a whole lot, if any surveillance from the outside of the church. But one vehicle that was seen at a nearby outdoor sporting store was a 2012-ish, 2010 silver Nissan Altima that had a oval-shaped sticker on the back bumper in the center. The cameras at the sporting goods store picked up the car coming through the parking lot just a few hours before Missy was murdered. And the reason that they stopped on this is because when the vehicle entered the parking lot, it cut off its lights and drove through the parking lot and parked, drove around, turned the headlights on, turned the headlights off, drove around a little more, and then later on exited the parking lot. And although I do believe that this is a little suspicious because of what time it is, I think this is information that just kind of got put in as a hopeful lead. But as we'll see, it seems to me like it's just maybe a little bit of filler because nothing comes from it. The person who was driving the car never came forward, and despite putting the vehicle out to the public, no one in the general area knew whose car it was. And they thought that they might be able to get a lead on the vehicle because of the bumper sticker that was on the car. There probably were a lot of silver 2012 Nissan Altimas in the area, but to have that bumper sticker specifically in the middle would definitely be, they would be able to whittle it down to just a few cars. But unfortunately, they were not able to find anybody that was driving the car that night. Now, as police are still continuing to investigate this case, they come across another gentleman that's name was Bobby Henry. Bobby Henry was originally given to the police as a person of interest. And the reason that Bobby was given to the police as a person of interest is people that knew him knew that he was a former police officer. And they also knew that he had been in a little bit of trouble before. The reason that he was a former police officer, he worked at a nearby area, also close to Midlothian. The name of the town was Lancaster, Texas. I know that we've talked about a lot of different little towns, but that's kind of the way that these areas outside kind of the metroplexes work. You know, you have the main towns and you have a lot of little towns that surround it. So all of these towns are relatively in the same area. Because Bobby was a former police officer and he had been charged and suspended from his job as a police officer for a sexual assault incident that happened in 1996 or 1998. So about 20 years before the murder took place, Bobby had been charged with or investigated for a sexual assault and was ultimately, let go by the police department that he worked for. So there had to have been maybe something there, or maybe he resigned, and we just aren't sure exactly what happened with him. But the people that knew him also knew, and Bobby admitted that he had some old tactical gear from his days in law enforcement. But because, like I mentioned, it had been almost 20 years since Bobby was in law enforcement, he told the police that none of that equipment that he had fit him, that it was all way too small, and there was no way that he could fit into it anymore. Also, Bobby, I believe, was 6'1", and so that kind of takes him out of the range on height that the police were looking for. And that's another reason I think we need to kind of put that on the back burner, because everybody in this situation that kind of is pointed out as a suspect never matches the height requirements. But Bobby also had a limp, very distinctive limp. And this made it look like he could be the guy. And I think people are so desperate, and understandably desperate, that they want someone caught for this crime, that now they latch on to Bobby. And I think for Bobby, he's in a very weird situation because he has a prior sexual misconduct charge. He is a former law enforcement officer. He has the police gear, quote unquote, that someone might have. And now he's looking like he might be the guy. So originally the police get a search warrant for Bobby's house, and they kind of collect some evidence on him, and they end up procuring a second search warrant, and they go in and they get Bobby's electronic devices, computers and things like that. Now, when they get the search warrant for Bobby's electronic devices, they find some interesting things on there by way of child pornography. So this is something that also sets Bobby back in his journey to clear himself of the murder, because now he has to answer for why he has child porn on his computer. I don't think there is a reasonable answer, but they don't really go into a whole lot of detail about that particular incident. They do find out that later on, Bobby was working as a security officer, and he actually worked at the church the day that they had Missy's funeral. But later on, he claimed to a news crew when they interviewed him that he didn't even know who Missy was and that he never heard her name. Now, I know that when I worked in law enforcement, we did funeral escorts and we did security and a lot of different things like that. Is it possible that Bobby, because he works in this, he's still in this line of work, which I can't quite understand how, but he's still able to be a security guard, and because he goes to a lot of different places and does a lot of different things, is it possible that he doesn't remember who Missy is? Yes, but I honestly believe that if it were a situation where I worked a funeral escort, or security involving a murder, that would probably stick out in my mind, and I might remember that. Now, that's just me speaking for myself, of course, but I don't think we should let Bobby off the hook for that one. Now, after Bobby they serve the search warrant on him, they find he has child pornography on his computer, he's arrested, he's taken into jail, and he sits in jail for 70 days. And they actually bring in an expert to study the way that Bobby walks to try to match it to the surveillance footage. But after the expert comes in and looks over everything, it is found that looking at Bobby and looking at the surveillance information, that it is inconclusive. They cannot tie Bobby to the surveillance footage with any sort of accuracy that would make them believe that it was him. Also, just shortly after this, his alibi for the morning of the murder is found to be credible, and he is released from jail. Now, I think that is an interesting point, because Bobby had child pornography on his computer, and after he's released from jail, there is no other information regarding Bobby and the child pornography case. I have some thoughts on what I think might happen with that, if there was a issue with probable cause to obtain those images, or if there was some verbiage talking about what the police could look for or take, because we have to understand these things. These search warrants are very specific. It's not kind of just a broad sweep of everything in the house that could have been criminal. I know that I think sometimes we wish it could be that way, and I really want to dive into that and a lot of other theories that I have when Mike's around, because Mike and I will have some interesting convo about a lot of things in this case. So I think in speaking about that, I'm going to leave it there right now for this, because there's a lot of theories that I have. There's a lot of ideas that I think we can throw around. And I know that Mike has a lot of things that he would like to say about this, because there are so many different aspects of this case that kind of just boggle the mind, especially because in 2021, we're over 5 years after the murder, and no one has ever been charged with this case. In my opinion, they've not really had a solid lead as to who this person might be. So, is it a crime of opportunity? Is it a crime of passion? Was something happening around Missy that we just haven't been able to figure out? And I think we have a lot of different avenues that we can go down. And this is where, when I started the podcast, when I said we're going to talk about the theories and we're going to talk about different things, this is the perfect case for us to really unpack a lot of different scenarios and ways that this might go based off Mike and I's experience in law enforcement and the way that this kind of whole situation had come about. Because like I said, this small town of Midlothian did not have a whole lot of crimes like this. I know the police chief even mentioned that in the 8 years that he had been with this particular department, there had not been a murder since he had been there. So I want to talk about, was the, department adequate in its staffing or in its experience and everything that goes with it and all of the different details that go around. But I think I'm going to have to hold off on there because Mike's going to have to be with me so that we can kind of unpack all this and go through it. It should be a very, very good debrief, and I hope you guys will come back to that one and check it out because it's going to be a good one. And that's where I'm going to leave it. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. That was a very interesting case, and I think it's going to get a whole lot better. I'd like to mention to everybody that we are on all of these social medias if you want to find us. If you are on Facebook, we are at The Murder Project. If you need to search for us, we're at facebook.com/podcasttmp. If you're on Instagram, we are at The Murder Project. And if you are on Twitter, we're at The Murder Pod. Also, I'd like to let everyone know and remember that if you haven't gone on and given us a review, given us the 5-star rating, anything like that, please go ahead and make your way over there because we would really, really appreciate it. We have about 10 reviews right now, and I think that is awesome. I'd like to keep growing that, and maybe I can read some of the reviews that we had on the show and let you guys know what people are saying. The reviews and the 5-star ratings and everything kind of help us get through the algorithm. So if you're not listening on Apple Podcast, you're listening on some other platform, please go on there and see if it gives you an option to rate us. Also, if you have an iPhone and you don't listen to Apple Podcast, just click on it anyway. Go in there, search The Murder Project, hit the 5-star, leave us a review. We'd really, really appreciate it. So that's where I'm going to leave it for this episode. I will talk to you guys next time on the debrief. It should be really, really good. I'm super excited. Mike's about to come into the studio, aka my kitchen, and we are going to lay it down. So I will see you guys next time. I will talk to you later. And before I go, I want you to remember, head up, eyes up, and stay alive.